Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Guide Training Seminar 2022. My name is Chris. I work here at Grand Canyon Conservancy Field Institute, and I am here with Sarah Haas, who works at Science and Research Management at Grand Canyon National Park. She's got some really cool stuff to share with us. So without further ado, Sarah, take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Haas. I'm the Deputy Chief of Science and Resource Management. And I really appreciate this time to share a few things about what's going on in our division this summer. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So first of all, I just want to say thank you guys for what you do. We have a really big park and we only have about 400 staff at the Grand Canyon, and sometimes visitors only see you. And so we really rely on our partners like Grand Canyon Conservancy and the Field Institute to help us tell the story of Grand Canyon and connect visitors to the park. So really appreciate all that you do and helping take care of our visitors. I just want to give you a little overview about Science and Resource Management structure. We have 32 permanent and temporary staff and a lot of seasonals. We also have several vacancies. So we're not fully staffed, but we do a lot of different work, and we have 7 main programs, as you'll see in this diagram: wildlife, cultural, veg, physical science, wilderness and overflights, data management, GIS, and a native fish ecology conservation program. So the bread and butter of what we do is a lot of monitoring for resource protection, just also making sure we know what's in the park so we're able to protect it. Some of our priorities for 2022 are listed here. We have a lot of them. This is not a total list, but it kind of brings out the highlights of what we're doing. One of the main things is tribal engagement and Indigenous affairs planning. We're also really focusing on workforce planning, making sure that our staff is supported. There's been a lot of pressure on staff with COVID, as well as just the amount of visitors that come to the park. So really making sure that we're focusing on our staff and supporting those folks and planning for the future and what we need. We do a lot of compliance work, which related to construction projects or just maintenance of the park. So making sure that we're looking at those areas that are going to be impacted potentially by park management projects. One of the big ones is the Trans-Canyon Water Line, and Ann Miller, who is also presenting, talks a lot about that project. So I encourage you to take a look at her video. We do a lot of river missions on the Colorado, including work on the tributaries for a variety of resources, including fish resources. And I'll talk quite a bit about that. Visitor use management, just monitoring the impact from visitors and seeing how we can help visitors have a better experience in the park. Wilderness management and potential designation. We're not designated wilderness, but we have recommended wilderness for the park. So we're looking at how we could move that forward to formal designation, but we manage our wilderness resources as wilderness per policy. So that's always ongoing in the park. Museum storage challenges. We just have a lot of really cool stuff that's been collected over the years, and we need to keep that museum resources intact. And then some feral trespass issues, which visitors see often, horses and cows in the park, and we're trying to manage that so we can get them out of the park and shore up some of our fence line so they don't get into the park. The 4 I'm going to really focus on though today is bison management, Colorado River resources and drought, climate change, and then some bat work that we're doing. And there'll be some resources at the end to help you learn more about those resources. So I talked a little about honoring our tribal partners, and this is a priority for our superintendent. It's his highest priority. And this is really about kind of healing some of the past relationships with our tribal partners and making sure that that those first voices are heard in how we interpret and manage the park. So this is one area that all divisions, the whole park is really trying to work on better relationships with our tribal partners and making sure that they have a place at the table, and we're engaging with them about what's going on in the park and the issues that are important to all of those tribal partners. So I want to talk about some of our super cool resources. I won't be talking about all of those pictured here, but we have just a lot of really interesting stuff going on in the park. And I want to kind of do a deeper dive into some of those things that you may see, or the people that you're with may be interested in knowing a little bit more about. So the first one is bison management, and bison have been on the North Rim for a long time, and we've been kind of watching and dealing with bison. They are truly bison. They're not beefalo or catalo or things you might hear about. They do have some genes associated with cattle, but they're at such a low level, and their genetic makeup is so unique that they are considered a very unique herd of bison. And so we're trying to manage them to protect the herd, but also realizing that there are some issues with having such a large animal in the landscape. Some of the background that you may or may not know about is they were brought to Arizona in 1905, and the state of Arizona has managed them on the House Rock Wildlife Area in the Kaibab National Forest since 1929. So quite a long history in Arizona. In the 1990s, the herd was at about 90 animals, and they would move back and forth between the House Rock Wildlife Area and the park. But starting in 2009, due to fires and breakdowns in fencing, the herd kind of moved on to the park and hasn't really moved back to the House Rock Wildlife Area since that time, although they do spend some time on the Kaibab National Forest. So in 2017, the park completed an environmental assessment on how to manage bison. At the time, the herd was about 400 to 600 strong, and modeling indicated that without management, they could grow to 1,500 bison over the next 10 years if they weren't managed. And you can see, some bison here under the rim, and just how thick the herds can grow along the roadside on the North Rim. So why is that a problem? We were noticing impacts to water and hydrology on the North Rim, vegetation and non-native species issues, and just not having sufficient vegetation to support the herd. Cultural resources were being impacted. Soils and other wildlife were being impacted. So there were just too many to be supported by the landscape. So the purpose of bison management for the park is to protect Grand Canyon's resources and values from the impacts of this growing herd in collaboration with other agencies. The environmental assessment actions outlined a few things that are kind of our targets. We want to keep collaborating with the federal, state, and tribal partners to reduce the herd to fewer than 200 animals as quickly as possible. So we kind of implemented a 5-year strategy to try to get to that target number. And then we're going to do that by non-lethal removal, by live capture and corralling, and transport of the bison out of the park, and also by lethal removal by skilled volunteers and tribal members. And then just keep on collaborating with the Game and Fish on bison hunts that happen outside of the park. So live capture started for the park in 2019. So we've had 3 years of live capture. And basically what happens is starting usually in June, July, we bait a corral and keep gates open, and the bison move in and they eat the hay and use the water. This is really effective, especially in drought years when there's not a lot of water on the landscape. It's pretty easy to move them into the corral. Then we close the gates and ship them off to a variety of tribes. So this partnership with Bison, the Intertribal Council has been really productive, and we've moved 124 to 5 different tribes over the years. And that Intertribal Buffalo Council has been really active in this program and supporting the growth of their own herds on their own reservation land. So this is a really effective tool, and we intend to continue this as kind of the core of our bison management over the next several years. In 2021, we also did a pilot project for lethal removal, and how that looked was basically 25 individuals were randomly selected in an Arizona Game and Fish application process where there was over 40,000 applicants throughout the country who wanted to be selected for this program. And then from those 25, we selected 12 qualified individuals, and they could bring 3 to 5 support helpers to come into the park for a week-long period. And we had 4 total weeks of the bison lethal removal. The goal was to remove 13 bison in this project. We had 1 week where the park just did our own in-house trial, and then 4 weeks with skilled volunteers. And it resulted in 5 bison being lethally removed, with the goal to make the park really less of a sanctuary for bison by having in-house culling operations. So in 2022, we plan to, like I said, continue the live capture and transfer of bison to various interested tribes. We haven't identified who will receive those bison yet, but that's in the works. We're going to evaluate that lethal culling pilot project and see if it's something that we want to continue into the future. Then there's a variety of data management, monitoring of bison impacts, monitoring of resource management, and then determining long-term, once we get to that 200 level, how are we going to continue to manage bison on the landscape? And if you have questions about the bison program that I can't answer on the 26th, there's an email provided for you to reach out and get more information. We're going to switch to Colorado River and drought challenges. So the Colorado River is, 278 miles inside the park, and we have quite a few challenges just along the river corridor: visitor use impacts, and just visitor use enjoyment of the corridor, beach maintenance, non-native vegetation, maintenance of listed species such as the southwestern willow flycatcher, a couple of fish species, razorback sucker and humpback chub. Archaeological resources, there's a ton of them along the river corridor, making sure those are protected. And then just drought and changes of the hydrology. A lot of these challenges stem from altered habitat due to the Glen Canyon Dam that was created in 1963. And the creation of that dam, really resulted in a huge change to the hydrology. So in this graph, you can see the dam creation in 1963, 64, and how it really changes the annual flow fluctuations, but it increased the daily fluctuations from the dam. We lost and continue to lose a lot of sediment that's trapped behind the dam, and we need that sediment to build beaches and backwater habitats, which are important to especially native fish and to visitors because they need places to camp. And then the water temperatures decrease drastically, which makes the river a better habitat for trout, which is not good for our native warm water species. So you'll see we have 8 historical native warm water species in the river community, but over time, 3 of these have been lost. And two of them are listed, including the humpback chub and the razorback sucker. So I'm going to mostly talk about fish conservation, but just in the context that there's lots of challenges along the river. Some of what we're doing for fish conservation is really focusing on humpback chub monitoring throughout the main stem and in some of the tributaries. We also remove trout, rainbow trout and brown trout out of Bright Angel in a really targeted 3-month period where we electrofish the whole stretch of that stream. And we have translocated humpback chub into Bright Angel as well as Havasu Creek. And now Havasu Creek is representing, a stronghold for humpback chub. It's a reproducing population, which helps with some of the redundancy. You want to make sure that, humpback chub have several places that they're doing well. And the Little Colorado River is the other kind of homeland for chub, but we have introduced and monitored them in Havasu Creek, and they're doing really well. We also want to keep working with partners. There's so many partners that work with Colorado River issues, and including the Bureau of Reclamation, who manages the dam. Part of that's going to be a rapid response because we know that there's several non-native species, not just trout, smallmouth bass, green sunfish, and others that we want to make sure don't get established in the river, or that could be really detrimental to our native fish community. I'm going to move on to some climate change planning for the park. Climate change is, well documented in the literature that no matter which emissions scenario happens, it's going to get hotter and drier over time. And we'll definitely be seeing the effects in Grand Canyon, and we are starting to see the effects in Grand Canyon, including this recent really prolonged regional drought. So as temperatures have, gone up over the years, that's going to be affecting a variety of our resources that are important to the tribes, to the public, and just to the ecology of the park. So what we're focusing on this year is working with the National Park Service Climate Change Response Program on a kind of a comprehensive report to help us get a handle on what's been done, what are the historical issues or historical norms we need to look at, what are projected climate analyses telling us, what's going to be happening with temperature, precipitation, snow, which is a huge part of our water source. We get water from the snowpack on the Kaibab Plateau, and the rainfall that happens there, it comes down into Bright Angel Creek through Roaring Springs. So making sure that, we're going to have sufficient water for the park into the future, and then some risk analysis for various resources in the park. So this report is in draft right now, but we know that there's going to be many impacts to several resources, and I listed, many of them here that will be summarized in this report. Tree regeneration and mortality, bird range shifts, bumblebees, non-native vegetation, drought, water availability. So what our plan is to use this information to help make informed decisions. And what that means is, instead of just going to forecasting what the future is going to be, the Park Service is really looking at climate change through this resist, direct, accept framework. And what that is basically, instead of just, watching it go down, what we can do is look at a resource, see kind of what the projections are telling us as far as, temperatures and rainfall, and then make decisions about various resources. Do we want to accept what's happening and just let that change happen? If it's not feasible to do management actions, do we want to, direct it to another habitat type if that is feasible? or, resist it and really try to keep what we have as much as possible, as long as possible. So that framework kind of moves us out of just like, watching things happen to being more active in management. And we're not going to be able to do this with all resources, but hopefully we're on a path to be able to identify some of these changes and make decisions and do on the ground action. And then I want to talk just a bit about bats and white nose syndrome surveillance in the park. So in Grand Canyon, 25% of our mammal species are bats. So we have, 14 genera and 22 species, and it's a very, very batty park, which is super cool. There's such a high amount of species richness with bats because we have so many diverse habitat types and places for bats to forage and roost: cliffs, forests, riparian areas, scrublands, grasslands, deserts, caves, and abandoned mines. So we're just really set up to have a lot of really different cool species. And bats are something that are just so easy to see in the summertime at night. It would be really, you'd have to be not paying attention to miss a bat. So what we're doing in the park and what we have been doing is studying bat ecology and some of the winter strategies and diet that our bats are using, and investigating activity patterns through acoustic detectors and mist netting, both along the river corridor and through the Bright Angel and North Kaibab corridors. We want to make sure we're protecting our roosts and hibernacula for bats. We have some caves that provide really important roosting sites and maternity sites for some of our bats, and then assessing bats for their health and screening for white nose syndrome. I imagine most of you are familiar with white nose syndrome, but if you're not, it's a fungus that came from Europe and was introduced to the United States in 2006 in New York. And it's a fungus that impacts the health of bats. And Pseudogymnoascus destructans is the fungus, and in its stage of active disease, you can see it on the wings and nose and ears of bats, like this one pictured here. And basically it wakens them from hibernation. They need to forage. They usually end up starving to death because this often happens in the winter time and there just isn't anything to eat. It's been a major issue since the time it was discovered. It's spread, over many states in the United States. It's been documented in the 2 states next to us. It's taken out, millions of bats. So it's a big deal for bat conservation. Some of the results that we have from the Grand Canyon is the PD, the fungus that causes white nose syndrome, was detected in one bat in 2019, but there's no indication of white nose disease yet in our bats. So there's no white nose syndrome yet in Grand Canyon, but we imagine it's probably only a matter of time until there is. So we need to keep monitoring bats and protecting bats as much as possible, because the indications are, especially with PD being detected in the park, that we will eventually see white nose in our bat communities. And that's likely to increase, over the next several years. Some bats are documented, being active in the wintertime and foraging in the wintertime, which is actually potentially good news for our bats, because we have a huge area for them to forage in. We may not see the impacts to our bats that are happening in areas that have no foraging opportunities in the wintertime. And the reason that is basically because of this huge elevational movement of bats. So you can, if a bat does have white nose syndrome and it wakes up during the wintertime, it has the opportunity to drop down into lower elevations that would have food sources during the winter. It's a hypothesis, but it seems they're already foraging in the wintertime in some areas anyway, and that if they were affected by white nose syndrome, they may be able to deal with it because there still is foraging opportunities. So we will be keeping an eye on that, and you may see folks out in the environment capturing or monitoring bats with those acoustic bat detectors. So some of the things that are happening, you know, species protection, we talked about roosts and hibernacula. It's really important to keep, you know, our caves are all essentially closed at this time. Ann Miller's going to talk a little bit more about cave closures, and it's really important to protect those areas because white nose can be spread pretty easily by humans coming in and out of caves. So we want to make sure that if there's anybody going into caves, even ourselves, we're doing decontamination of our equipment so we don't promote the spread. And then not at the park, but researchers are looking at, you know, bacteria that would inhibit the growth of the fungus that causes white nose syndrome, and that could be a direct intervention for populations that are already affected. We also do some rabies surveillance, and we continue to, you know, swab bats for rabies detection, and making sure we're working with the river communities to understand about bats, what happens if a bat lands on you, which has happened in the past, and then making sure that we're working with our public health folks on rabies surveillance and reporting any incidents of bat-human contact. And along that lines, you know, there's 4 C's of rabies prevention. You know, if say you're out in the field and someone wakes up and there's a bat, you know, on their face or neck or body or something, or you find a bat that's out and it's behaving strangely, you know, we would want you to collect the bat, but only really if it's dead, and you wear gloves. We don't want anybody, you know, pulling a net out and going after a rabid bat. But if you can collect the bat safely, that would be helpful to get it to the park, or just reporting it. You want to contact a park official and a state, the NPS public health folks, or a county contact. If there is an interaction, it's really important to report that. If there is a wound, you want to clean that right away. Even if you don't see a wound, just washing off the site that you know a bat was on your person, and then consult with a healthcare provider as soon as possible. So here are some contact informations about our National Park Service Office of the Public Health in case there's any questions about bats. There's a Coconino County Public Health Officer listed, and then Brandon Holton is our bat biologist for the park. And especially if you see odd bat behavior, a lot of bats, or a bat out in the middle of the day, or a bat that's aggressive, we want to know about that right away. So here's some resources for you to do that. And then I just provided some resources for you all, some websites. So they'll be part of this presentation to click on to learn more about those resource areas that I took a little bit of a deeper dive into for you to learn more about if you have questions. And then my contact information is here. I'm happy to, you know, talk with folks, or if you have a question, send me an email. I'm also going to be available on Saturday, the 26th, to answer any questions about what I presented, or if you just have questions about what's going on in the park or in our division, we can chat about that. I just want to say thank you all, and hope you have a great season and a safe season. And I'll see you all on the 26th.
Thanks, Sarah. That was great. I know that I got a lot of questions that I'm really excited to find out some answers to on the 26th. Lots of great information, really. Thanks a lot. Just want to remind everybody, February 26th, 9:30 till noon. Tune in. If you have a chance to submit your questions ahead of time, we would really appreciate that. It'll make things move a little bit smoother. But we will also have a chat room available. You can ask your questions and follow-up questions on the 26th as well. So thanks, Sarah. Really appreciate it. That was amazing. Thank you.